Okay, we are live.
All right. Hey, man, I'm sorry, everybody, about that. I'm going to
Wait, we're
blame
live.
it on
We
Google.
we're live, but I have not told everybody to reload the page yet.
Oh, okay. Tell me when.
Okay, we've told the guests to reload the page. Let's give them a few seconds to do that. For those of you who are watching already, please forgive us for this technical snafu. Hopefully, we'll get the show back on the road here in just a second without sound distortions. Okay, I already see that somebody is saying they can watch, so now we can
All
turn it
right.
back over to you, Scott. Sorry about the technical difficulty. You were just ramping up.
No
So if
problem.
you can remember where you were, please continue.
Sure. Well, I'm fairly certain the problem was on my end, although I'm going to blame it on Google Chrome or Google Hangout or something. But the problem was, at least here in the office. But anyway, sorry, everybody. And then the resetting everything, that definitely is Google's fault. No. But anyway. I'm sorry. All I was saying was most Americans aren't hippies and leftists and communists and hypocrites. And so TV and government like to make it seem as though those are the only people who are anti-war, when in fact it ain't so. And when Ron Paul, for example, gave people the opportunity and said, hey, you could be a conservative Christian Republican like me and still be anti-war, they went, oh, whew, because I was thinking that this war was really stupid and horrible, but I didn't want to be a hippie. I didn't want to be like a hippie. But now you're telling me I can be the Ron Paul revolution. Hell yeah, Ron Paul sticker goes on the back of the truck, anti-war they are, and off they go. Millions of people he gave them a permission slip to go ahead and be conservative and still anti-war, no problem. And if your uncle wants to fight with you about it, just tell him, hey man, look up Ron Paul. You can't get more, Republican than that, in a sense. All right. So enough of that. The other thing is, I guess I should give a word toward patriotism because I got patriotism. I'm a Texan. So I'm pretty damn patriotic about Texas because I can't help it. I've been brainwashed my whole life, and I agree with it. I like Texas. And I like the right-wing parts, and I like living in Austin, too, and, it's where I'm from. And I feel the same way about America, too. I've traveled quite a bit of it, mostly when I was a kid, but I love America, and I think patriotism is, could be considered, I don't know everybody's exact definitions, but I could see it, as a love of the land, a love of the people, some aspects at least of the culture, the various parts of, the land where you're from, all that, that's fine. And hey, in a real pinch, if it's really necessary, I guess even identifying with the government, if it really is securing your interests, protecting you from some threat. But of course, patriotism gets manipulated very quickly into nationalism, which I would just define as the same thing, only the stupid version, where the discrepancy between what's the country and who are the people, what is the society, and who are the people who happen to have seized the most power within it, become all, the discrepancies become diminished and faded. People can't tell the difference as much anymore, particularly in a crisis. And then so they're willing to get behind their politicians and confuse that with the love of their country. Even though they know that politicians don't care about the country. Everybody knows politicians are all lawyers. Everybody knows politicians are all scum. And yet everybody still thinks, but surely they mean to do what I would do if I was there, or at least they try to care about the national interest first, but no, of course not. They're just a bunch of psychopaths. And most of them don't know their ass from a hole in the ground either. They couldn't do the right thing. They can't. Just look at them. When they're trying to do the right thing, they can't. And most of the time, what they're trying to do is get away with blue bloody murder, not the right thing. They got PR guys all day to spin it as the right thing and an attempt to do the right thing. And there are people who get on board and buy into the propaganda who do have some level of power and help forge the consensus that, yes, this is all spreading democracy, like West Germany and Japan and this kind of thing again. when, really what's going on here is that after World War II, America kept its national security state that they built up during the war. And so that's it. The CIA and the Pentagon and all the private contractors that service them and all of the pressure, political pressure and campaign money and all that goes into Congress, all the money that goes into the think tanks and advertising on the major TV networks, which there are only just a few. And if you watch Sunday morning, serious adult TV news time, then they'll just show you Northrop Grumman and Lockheed ads all through the damn show. I mean, their point is invest in this. You're a part of this. You Sunday morning audience, this is for you. Put your money in Northrop Grumman because we're going to be making money because we're making better and better weapons for the government all the time. And they're not even shy about it. And that's your iron triangle right there is, the think tanks that come up with all the rationalizations and all the excuses, and the media, the Congress. And it's Ike's military-industrial complex, but you can just add the media, or he meant Congress in the first place. You could add the executive branch, the entire executive branch to it. And for that matter, really any business of any decent size that wants to secure profits with a captive market, you do business with the Pentagon. Whether you're talking about toothpaste or tube socks or bullets, it's all the same difference. If you can, pawn a lot off on the Army at not even a discount for a high volume, that's how business is done in America. It's as corrupt as Afghanistan. That's the root of the empire. And the other thing is, I want to point out in a couple of ways here briefly, because I wasted a lot of time with technical difficulties here, is that if you look at the policies of the empire on the face of it, I guess if you're, raised American conservative, then I have to kind of especially, and liberals too for that matter, but I kind of got to ask you especially to bear with me, just hear me out for the possibility, all this stuff you've invested in that maybe, just maybe you're wrong. Just hear me out maybe a second. That everything that the government has done, say, post-Cold War, let's not redo all of history, but say, since the Soviet Union fell apart, that maybe that's all been counterproductive for the American national interest. Maybe it wasn't worth it to stab Saddam Hussein, America's friend, in the back in order to reinstall the king of Kuwait on his throne so he could continue his tortured dictatorship there. Maybe it wasn't worth it to put a bunch of bases in Saudi Arabia and keep them there. Maybe it wasn't worth it to fight a half war against Saddam, leave a bunch of hawks stewing for 10 years saying that we should have gone all the way to Baghdad, while encouraging the Shia and the Kurds to rise up and then stab them in the back in the Great Bay of Pigs of the Desert of 1991, the spring of 1991, which then became the excuse for the no-fly zones and the blockade and the permanent whipping boy status of Iraq all through the end of the Bush senior years and the Bill Clinton years. For 10 years straight, from 1990 all the way through when Bush took power in 2001, for 11 years, 10 and a half, full-scale blockade and sanctions and partial, at least, war against Iraq from bases in Saudi Arabia. Unending support for Israel, and not just for their existence, but for their aggressive wars against an occupation of Lebanon and Palestine. At that time, they'd been occupying Palestine, in the 90s. They'd been occupying Palestine already for 30 years and had been occupying southern Lebanon for about 18 or so, something like that, since 1982. And maybe it hasn't, for that matter, served our purpose to expand NATO up to Russia's borders, which was warned against by the people who put NATO together in the first place in the name of containing the Soviet Union. George Kennan, who was Mr. X, who wrote the policy, who in Foreign Affairs magazine back in 1946 or 47, I guess it was 46, wrote the containment policy and said we got to stop Soviet communism, roll it back where we can, and all this kind of thing. But in the late 90s, he said it's absolutely the wrong thing for Bill Clinton and the Republicans to expand NATO into Eastern Europe, because what it's going to do is, first of all, it's breaking a promise that we would not expand the American military alliance east of Germany if the Warsaw Pact dissolved and the USSR dissolved and the Russians brought their army back behind the Ural Mountains as they did. And that's, you know, already bad enough, but we're going to provoke a response out of the Russians. And then, and you can read this in an article by Tom Friedman, believe it or not, in the New York Times in 1998, where he interviewed George Kennan. And George Kennan is saying, and then when Russia reacts, all the people who built up NATO saying, don't worry, the Russians won't react. This has nothing to do with picking a fight with them. They won't take it wrong. This is perfectly fine. They will all say, see, we needed NATO in order to contain the Russian threat. Look at them reacting, which is, of course, exactly what is happening now. And unlike Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, the Russians actually have thousands of hydrogen bombs. That's the war that we absolutely cannot fight. And it sounds ridiculous to even talk about it 25 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, that there could conceivably be any kind of nuclear confrontation between us and the Russians. But in fact, our government is making that more and more likely all the time by overthrowing governments in Eastern Europe, by attempting to overthrow Russia's sock puppet government in Damascus, in Syria, and picking fights with them where we actually have no reason to do it. And then back to all the bases in Saudi and all that, of course, this is all reference to what angered our friends, the Mujahideen, from the anti-Soviet war in Afghanistan in the 1980s. Well, they're the ones who did in alliance with Egyptian Islamic Jihad, the Azam group that bin Laden inherited from Abdul Azam. They were the guys that did the First World Trade Center bombing, plotted the Lincoln and Holland Tunnel and UN attacks, who attacked the Saudi embassy in 1995, in Saudi Arabia, the American embassy in Saudi Arabia, or consulate right next to it or whatever. And then in 96, they did the Khobar Towers attack, bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed did, which our government blamed on Iran because that's what Israel wanted. To this day, they still blame it on Iran, even though Michael Scheuer and the rest of the CIA experts say it was Osama that did it. And then, of course, the Africa embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 98, and then eventually September 11th. All this was brought on by American intervention in the Middle East. George Kennan could have said the same thing about the bin Ladenite terrorists, call them the Azamite terrorists, our former friends, as he said about the Russians, that you can only provoke people so far before they become the enemy, and then you get to claim that, oh, look, we have a new enemy, a justification for everything we've done so far and everything we must now do. But the thing is, if time is anything like a line the way I perceive it, then our intervention far precedes any sort of radical Islam extremist terrorist war against the United States of America. And they made clear in their interviews with CNN, bin Laden did interviews with CNN in 1996 and with ABC News, I think in 1997. He put out his fatwas of 96 and 98, and he said that Islam mandates a defensive war to defend innocent Muslims from aggression, and what you're doing is aggression, and so we're declaring war against you. That's what it says. And you don't have to agree with that, or there's no rationalization for a bunch of terrorists to act exactly like Republicans and Democrats and slaughter civilians for their own purposes. Nobody's saying that, but it is what it is. They said what it is that they're doing. And to see now, after, and just to keep a long story short, after the intervention between 1990 and 2001 brought on the September 11th attack, now we're supposed to forget even all the intervention that took place after 2001 through now and say, oh no, look, radical Islam makes these people hate us for some reason and makes them want to attack us and go to war with us all the time. So I guess that those people just understand one thing, force, and never even mind exactly what that force has wrought, that American force has wrought in that region over the past 15 years, leading to this massive sectarian war, probably better than a couple of million people dead by now, or 1.5 million dead, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people displaced, the Iraqi society completely destroyed. The country of Iraq will never exist again. And boy, listen to the politicians say that's their plan for Iraq. Is the Baghdad government's going to be really nice to Sunnistan now, and they're going to put it back together again, and that's their policy for, undermining the Islamic State as they go forward. It's something that on the very face of it, is absolutely laughable because of the situation that America and Britain left the last time they invaded. And anyway, so it's not in your interest. Oh, one more thing. Robert Higgs and Bob Murphy and all the great Austrian school economists will explain to you too that the boom and bust cycle that is generated by the central bank and the fractional reserve banking system backed up by the government and the Federal Reserve's regulation of reserve ratios and interest rates, that all that is tied up in the war policy. That boom and bust cycle, that boom is the sound of the bombs falling on people's heads that you hear there. All that artificial prosperity is the Federal Reserve cranking out money into the economy in order to make the war seem free. But it's not. And then later, when you're dealing with artificially high prices in this sector and that one, or you're staring at your shoes standing in the unemployment line and you're wondering why you're doing it, your time wasted in that unemployment line, that's your cost of the Iraq War. That's what you're doing there, is you're paying your fair share of killing 1 million people over there. And that's how it always works. World War I, World War II, every single one of them in the 20th century except Korea, which Ike balanced the budget and got the hell out of there before, Truman could do too much damage. But in every other one, there was a massive inflationary boom that was generated by the central bank in order to pay for the war and defer its costs until later, in order to fool the people that they somehow were gaining from this. Remember, George Bush even sent rebate checks in the mail to every American. Here's $300. And this is your, basically like it's your dividend check from all the money we're making off the Iraq War, but who's we? The American people were paying for that. And that's what Garrett Garrett said back in the 1950s, is he said, unlike in every other empire, and he wasn't recommending this, this is what Donald Trump says too, in a worse and twisted way, is that in every other empire, they go overseas to steal and conquer and take and profit. In America, all the profit is made by exploiting the American people as they pay for all the munitions and all the other costs that are caught up in the war effort, but it's all wasted. We don't make anything off it at all. The whole thing is just an equation for bankruptcy, and that's what's happening. So, they will tug on your heartstrings, and they'll talk about baby Jesus and red, white, and blue, and died for your freedom. And, of course, some did die believing that they were fighting for your freedom. And they'll invoke every slogan that they can to avoid the real issue, which is that just because you're from here doesn't mean that the politicians that you hate every day anyway are any better people or mean well in any sense when what they do is directed at people overseas, and on the face of it, it's far more violent. The CIA overthrowing governments, backing Mujahideen warriors even now, backing the Iranians in some wars and their Saudi opponents and the others and whatever. It's madness, and it's got to stop. Oh, audio. Sorry. Go ahead and intervene, Lobo. Take it.
Well, that's fine. I could still understand you, but everybody is now convinced that the NSA is watching us. You said Bin Laden too many times.
Well, should I try to restart once, or that won't work?
No, we don't have enough time. We can understand you, so it's not great, but let's go ahead and get to some Q&A before we run out of time, if you don't mind. The first question was, if Trump wins and the anti-war left can oppose wars again, do you think that an awesome, articulate, and enduring anti-war commentator such as yourself can actually make a full-time living again?
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? I was just thinking that would be the one good result, is I'd be able to pay my light bill on time. Yes, I mean, well, the other thing is the real reason that I lost my position at antiwar.com, it's not just because the liberals faded away, which they did, but it's because the FBI had an illegal so-called counterintelligence, counterterrorism investigation of antiwar.com under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and looking specifically into antiwar.com's donors. And so that scared the hell out of a bunch of them when that became public. And that cost, Jeremy Sapienza, Matt Barganier, John Glazer, and myself all got laid off. We took a massive hit from people being afraid. That's the chilling effect of the terror war, and I hate to make it personal because it ain't about me. I'm a privileged white male, blah, blah, blah. But no, actually, I lost my job because of the FBI breaking the law, investigating my employer.
Wow, that's quite something. Put that together with what Tatiana just told us, makes you wonder. We have another question, though, more hardcore anarcho-cap question, and it is: do you think it's possible that the war business could be privatized and conducted by companies instead of governments?
Well, as long as we have governments, we're going to have wars. I mean, the best way to avoid the war, I think, is to get rid of the central state as much as possible. If you can't really defending this land from foreign attack, then I don't think you'd need anything bigger than, you know, spontaneous state militias to repel them anyway. I can't imagine any power. Can you think of any state in the world that would ever try it? The only way anyone could conquer the USA would be if Russia carpet bombed us with hydrogen bombs and just hit every major city and determined to extinguish our civilization. But then there's nothing left to occupy. There's
It's a
nothing.
lose-lose proposition.
So basically, you know, there is no threat. I don't even think we need private security forces, or on that level.
Okay, let's see. We have another question here, and that is, it's for us both. It says, assuming one wants to succeed in business in this volatile world, and assuming one does not want to invest in weapons manufacturers, is there a smart way to play this, to think through these challenges?
Well, that's a good question. I don't ever have any money, as the previous questioner was pointing out. So I don't really, have any investment tricks or ideas or whatever. But I would say long-term bet on inflation, because these guys, we know they don't know how to do anything but kill people and print money, and that's going to continue. They don't know how to stop. So that would be a way. But even then, you invest in gold. You look at Freeport-McMoran, they're just outright gangsterizing, using the American empire to kill and steal and mine that gold from the people of West Papua at no rights whatsoever. So, even then, even you just want to invest in precious metals, you got to be careful of who you're doing business with. There's, it's a pretty bloody world if you want to keep your dollars clean. Maybe invest in pot.
Very interesting response.
That's a business.
And for what it's worth, I'd say Doug Casey would largely agree with that. If the war machine is what it is, and there are ways to profit directly from that, but you got to look yourself in the mirror again. And the other absolutely predictable thing, as you say, is the printing money. It's going on all over the world, and that has consequences. When you compare the little paper units to real things like gold.
Yep.
Alrighty, let's see. We have a bunch of comments here, but I'm not seeing another question at the moment. Let me ask the audience, folks, we got about 5 minutes left before we need to cut off and go to the next one. So if you have another question, this is a good time to ask it.
I have a question. Is my audio still unbearable?
It is not good, but it is intelligible.
And you're sure, though, that if you stay on, but I X out, that I won't be able to rejoin you?
You could try it.
Let's try it.
We have a minute, so go ahead.
That
Sounds better.
all right.
All right. Okay, so let me ask you something real quick. I haven't seen this from the audience yet, but I know we have an international audience, and your presentation has been America-centric. That's okay. Yeah. That's your background. But if you personalize it, maybe that'll help. And I imagine that when you come out as anti-war, just about everybody assumes you're a leftist, and it must drive you crazy. Or your parents or other people, they're going to criticize you and assume all kinds of things about you and your ideas that are not true. And I'm wondering how you deal with that, because people in our audience who, from their own perspective, in their own country, they may love their land, but not their government or its policy, and they're going to run into that same thing. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think the best strategy, and I'm a libertarian, so I'm right about everything. I'm better than everyone on everything, and so I can never lose an argument against anyone. So if I'm dealing with a right-winger, then I'll just be more conservative than him. I'll outflank him on the right and say, well, if you want a world empire, you have to have an IRS. If you want a world empire, you have to have inflationary money. If you know, whatever, pick on right-wing issues that conservatives supposedly care about and just outflank them, and then the same thing for the leftists too. I'm better on peace, I'm better on drug wars, I'm better on prisons, I'm better on natural rights and therefore civil rights and civil liberties than them too. And so, you know, if they want to say, oh, well, you're a right-winger because you believe in capitalism, then I'll just explain the human rights angles of capitalism. And, you know, do you agree with capitalist acts between consenting adults and these kinds of questions, and outflank them on the left. And so, you know, the real point is, to me, and this is my naive young optimist that still is in me somewhere, is that at the root of liberalism is liberalism. It used to be, and I know it's mostly corrupted by socialism now, but there is, you know, there's a well-meaning motive, which is that, hey, even poor, uneducated schlubs have a right to an opportunity at a decent life in this world, that kind of thing, right? Liberals believe that. And on the right, conservatives, I hope, at their core, they want to conserve the old classical liberalism that the Constitution supposedly was written to uphold. The Bill of Rights that's passed down to us from James Madison and George Washington and all that, so that we always have that. And if what they're trying to conserve is what's the best about freedom in our society, then there's a lot to appeal to there too. And so it should never be a problem, really, to be attacked from the right unless you're really a leftist, and then a right-winger is going to have you because you're not going to be consistent. You're for aggression on this, this, and that. That's problematic. But I don't ever have to deal with that.
That's a very entertaining answer. We do have another question here, and sort of segueing from the last one about what's been handed down to us. Why do you think the U.S. government or the U.S. people didn't heed Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex? I mean, that was black and white, plain as day, from a guy who knew, presumably. Why didn't that warning get heeded?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think that the real reason is because he gave the speech on the last day. And the next day began the honeymoon of Camelot and all this, you know, magical PR hype around the Kennedy administration. And Kennedy had done what I just said, only in an evil way. He outflanked Nixon on the right with his so-called missile gap, and saying that the Republicans aren't doing enough to protect us from the Soviets. So the civil rights liberals, they were too dreamy-eyed to notice that this guy was out hawking Richard Nixon when it came to the Soviet Union as he was running for president. And then it's the same in that era as it is in our era. Millions, everybody basically, except the hardcore libertarians or maybe a hardcore communist, see the Republicans and Democrats as very, very different. They don't see the national security state. They don't know what that means. The military-industrial complex, that sounds complex. I don't know what he means. I don't know what he's saying. And he's gone. He's gone away. Nobody heard from him again until he said we should rein in the CIA a month after Kennedy got shot. Oh no, that was Truman. That was Truman said that. Eisenhower basically never heard from again. Never. And he did win some armies against, win some wars against the army. They wanted more and more and more divisions all the time, and he told them, "No way, Jose," and instead built up our nuclear bomber force and said, "See, we don't need a bunch of soldiers. That'll lick the army. I'll just give all the money to the Air Force instead." That was Eisenhower's way of dealing with the military-industrial complex to the extent that he did. And he said, man, I was the supreme allied commander of NATO. I'm Dwight D. effing Eisenhower, and it took everything I have to rein in the Pentagon and these guys and stop them from ruling me, and God help any other president of the United States from now on. I mean, he said that. And then, but whatever, too little, too late. He gave that speech on his last day in office and said, good luck, America. I just screwed you for 8 years. Oh, and by the way, I just created crises in 15 countries with CIA coups and et cetera that are going to be blowing back on you and are going to be the justification for this national security state from now on. So, you know, screw you, America. Thanks a lot for nothing, Ike. You know, that's the whole thing of it, is if he had given that speech at the beginning, after he ended the Korean War, and it just told the American people, look, all this stuff about the Soviet menace is a bunch of crap, and your army are a bunch of liars, and I'm telling you so, and I'm Dwight Eisenhower, so you have to believe me over them, because, again, Dwight D. effing Eisenhower, right? And I'm going to go deal with the Soviets, we're going to end this GD Cold War right this second. He could have done it. He could have done it. He was like Eisenhower. And even with all the John Birchers crying that, oh, he's a communist or whatever. No way. He's Dwight Eisenhower. And instead, he was the one. He, as bad as Truman, got us into this mess. So screw him.
Okay, on that very positive note, I think we're going to have to call it quits. I'm sorry, because we're just getting on a roll here, but we need to make way for our next speaker.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me, everyone, and sorry very much about the audio. I don't know what the problem is here, man. I'll try to reset
It's very thought-provoking. Much appreciated. You have a good one, Scott.
You too. See ya.